As regular viewers may be aware, and do keep this to yourself, but I'm quite the fan of looking into the world of obscure and forgotten movies. From Alien Species to Riverbend, while I don't actively seek out films that no one's ever heard of, when they're quite literally dropped in front of me, I'm definitely not one to refuse. And today's film is a perfect example of this, though I do rather think that I may have actually hit a bit of a brick wall with this one, so buckle up because, well, this one's looking a bit shorter than usual. Santa's pocket watch, apparently known in some parts of the world as Santa's timepiece, exists. And that's really about the beginning and end of what I could give you in terms of history on this thing. Seriously, the credits list for this film is tiny, and beyond the fact that it was released to the public, I can't find any concrete information on it past a title, BBFC certification and runtime. Adding to the headache, the director is also the writer, lead animator and editor, and as far as I can tell, this is literally his only credit, and his animation studio did nothing else before or after this release. With the only other information about who this mystery creator could be being a slide at the end of the feature listing a company that helped fund the creation of the short, which no longer exists, and has almost no online presence outside of acknowledging that they gave him money to make this at one point. So, Santa's Pocket Watch is a 21-minute short film presented with leading narration from actor Willie Rushton. The plot follows Sam, a young boy whose big wish this Christmas is to meet Santa. After his mother tells him to go to bed on Christmas Eve, Sam sneaks back downstairs and stays up with the hope of actually trying to meet the big guy himself. Santa, meanwhile, has his elves loading up his sleigh ready for a big global trip, while also mentioning that a massive party is going to take place when he gets back to celebrate another Christmas well delivered. And the elves are all delighted. Santa heads out to start his run and gets to Sam's house, and Sam is amazed to be able to see the man. Thinking quickly, he climbs into Santa's sack, hoping that he'll take Sam to the North Pole. Santa heads back to his sleigh and leaves unknowingly with Sam in tow. There's a complication and the sleigh crashes, hurling Sam into a tree. Santa spots Sam hanging about and isn't mad that he basically stowed away. Instead, he offers to take Sam to the North Pole for a guided tour of the workshop, and he invites him to the big Christmas party. And that's exactly what happens. Sam goes back to the North Pole with Santa, helps the elves prepare the party, and then they have an absolute ball, eating rich food, laughing and joking. They all open presents, and when Sam and Santa realise that Sam's presents are all back at his house, Santa gives Sam his trusty pocket watch as an extra gift and memento of his visit to the North Pole. After all that fun, Sam falls asleep on Santa's lap and wakes up back at his house, only he realises that he still has Santa's pocket watch. He heads back to bed, but not before some carolers sing us out as we sweep out to the heavens. And that's the whole movie, all 21 minutes of it. Well, barring 3 or 4 slides worth of end credits. I told you this was going to be short. Script-wise, well, there honestly isn't a lot to say. It's not so much a 3-act structure, more a 2-act structure with a resolution stapled to it. It's concise to the point of malnourishment. It tells a story, and I think the story it does tell is fine, but this thing really doesn't overstay its welcome, and I think it'd probably have benefited from being just a little bit longer and having a bit more room to breathe. In fact, the fact it's so underwritten, I actually found quite charming and quaint in places, because at the beginning of the film everyone's so excited about the big Christmas party that's going to happen, and the film really bigs up that this is going to be something really impressive. So in my mind I was thinking music, toys, games, noise, party food, crazy fun times for all. So when the big crazy Christmas party turns out to be jelly and Christmas pudding, some carol singing and present opening, where everyone gets one gift each and is beyond grateful for it, well, it kind of melted my heart a little bit. It reminded me of pre-internet Christmas, of days where you wouldn't know what you wanted for Christmas until you saw it in a shop or in a shopping catalogue. A time when Christmas, in the UK at least, was inexplicably tied to tat and schmaltz, cheap and cheerfulness. Where some nice food, a good present and some light entertainment was Christmas Day. And it wasn't about piles of presents, a larder that could feed a small third world country and making your house look like a Christmas card. You'd just napalm the front room with the most flammable tinsel you could find, hang some weird shit off the ceiling and call it a day. And in finding a film that was able to so effortlessly capture that feeling, as a Brit, well, I found it rather lovely. I'm by no means saying that this should be a Christmas staple, you understand. I think most people will find this thing deathly dull, but to me, it's small points that, in the moment, were just unique enough to endear me to it. Like the elves all having unique names and characteristics, like Conk, the elf with a big nose, Pocket, the elf whose animators couldn't be bothered to move his arms, or Socks, the elf who wears a sock on his head. It's little details like the fact that Santa has a reindeer called Garibaldi, after the biscuit, who loves eating cherries, or the extended but charming caroling sequences. In almost every sense, it's not trying to be flashy or grand or even really attention-seeking. This to me is a script that's just more than happy to do its own thing in a quiet little part of the animation sphere, and I kinda have to respect that. Given this is a film with very little plot, it's got a breakneck pace, the dialogue feels relatively naturalistic, and given the biggest peril in this thing is Sam almost falling out of a tree, it's incredibly gentle as a work. In fact, all I can really say against the film is it maybe would have been a bit nicer had the party been a bit more of a party rather than just an evening meal with some presents being opened. And I also feel that the ending is a little underwhelming. It maybe would have been nice to see what happened at the workshop after Santa got back from dropping Sam off, or Sam's actual Christmas day, or maybe even had there been some kind of outro monologue wishing people a Merry Christmas in the same way that they do an intro monologue to set the scene. I just felt the closing moments of this were a bit abrupt and probably could have been a bit better reinforced. But otherwise, while only probably enjoyable to a very small audience, I came away from this with a feeling of nostalgia that I haven't felt since the mid-90s, which I found tremendously comforting. This entire thing, from what I can find online, seems to have more or less been created by a Mr. Pete Parsons. Pete has been seemingly confused on IMDb with two other Pete Parsons, one a senior representative of the video game company Bungie, and the other a video game composer. I've tried my absolute damnedest to try and find any information on Pete that I could, but I couldn't find a single thing related to him outside of this project. The closest I got in terms of a match after a while of looking was a Pete Parsons that did turn up who would have been around 18 years old at the time that this film was made, but he lived in Australia and predominantly worked in ceramics, and he died in 1993. It's entirely possible that this Pete Parsons did some kind of studying in the UK, made a short animation piece and then decided it wasn't for him and went back to Australia to work in ceramics, but I find it unlikely. That being said, given the only other options I could find online were an 80-plus-year-old professor of Greek history and a 94-year-old dead gastroenterologist, I'm fairly convinced that the world may never get to meet the real Pete Parsons. The art direction here is, I thought, rather charming. They've gone for a bit of an odd contrast of making backgrounds fairly minimalist but giving foregrounds some quite nice additional details. I'm not gonna lie, when I booted this up for the first time I was fully expecting 8 frames a second and things only moving if they absolutely had to. But surprisingly, the animation is pleasant, decently fluid, there's a nice amount of moving detail throughout which really did catch me off guard. It's very much a representative of that kind of era of animation that spawned shows like Rhubarb and Custard or Henry's Cat. It's a similar field, just on a budget. The characters have decent animation on expression, and while again I don't want to big this thing up too much as it really is very basic in terms of what it wants to do, it would be amiss of me not to say that given how many absolutely trashy animated Christmas specials I've sat through over the years, it's nice to just see something that gets the basic elements of visual storytelling comfortably right. The framing of the animation is also pretty nicely handled, composition of sequences are functional but pleasant enough, it's rather lacking production really, and it ties back into what I was saying about the script in the sense that had the script chosen to do more, they maybe could have gotten a bit more creative with how we move through the animation. That being said, there's a nice transition into the end credits that I thought was quite interesting, and the short does have an odd flourish of creativity in terms of how it gets us from scene to scene. So, I'd honestly say it was just about passable. Just. Performance-wise, we have Willie Rushton providing narration and voices for all our characters, and this man just gives a total hug of a performance. He's warm, charismatic, curmudgeonly in places. He's just an absolute delight. And the fact that he actually bothered to put a bit more effort into actually emoting the characters was just a really nice touch. Again, I've seen way too many animated specials where cast members just sound bored or aloof. Willie here, though, is positively charming and is probably the best thing about this special altogether. And finally, the soundtrack. And it's a quite nice acoustic, border orchestral, stringy type arrangement with a distinct festive twist. Apart from a half dozen special thanks credits that literally just name people on first name terms only, the only other credit attached to this special is Stephen Cordell. And this was his only credit. I think he honestly does a quite lovely job. The music is mostly woven into the animation, punctuating key moments wonderfully. It's a bit odd to see what would be considered a modern Christmas special utilising largely classical and folk style compositions, but I feel it works fine enough here. If I had to grumble, I'd say there were maybe some moments where they don't add a score to the background and it can leave the film feeling a little hollow. But then, I put that more down to the fact that as a modern cinema goer, we've kind of been compelled towards treating silence in films as being something meaningful. So when it turns up just because they forgot to dub any sound in or they didn't feel it was essential, well, it comes across as a bit off. I have no idea when Santa's Pocket Watch was first put out into the world, largely because I can't even nail down what decade it was produced in. Having looked into it, I feel fairly confident it was released at some point in the 70s. The BBFC has it listed as 1970, which I feel may be a tad earlier than expected, but looking at some of the various releases this film had, it does ultimately feel like as good a guess as any. I can confirm it definitely was broadcast on television in the 80s, most likely on BBC Two, as the BBC Genome Project has it listed as being repeated around Christmases 1989 and 1990. Because there's no copyright notice at the end of the film, there's no definitive way to date it, and the only hint included in the short is a passing reference to Elton John glasses. Which isn't the help you'd think it would be, because Elton John's first solo album and tours started in April 1970. So it could be any time after that, honestly. What I can tell you is that it had multiple VHS releases over the years in 1989, 1990, 1991, and its last VHS release was as late as 2001, which is the copy that I own. The earliest copy I could find came from 1988 and was released by Abbey Home Entertainment on their children's label Tempo Video. Bizarrely, it's also had multiple DVD releases in both the UK and US between 2001 and as late as 2016. Most of these releases don't even have distributor information available, so nailing down exactly who's put what out and when is proving to be beyond difficult. The only one that I can properly nail down is a US release from a company called Front Row Entertainment, who put their copy of the film out on DVD at the exact same time that my VHS copy from Just Entertainment got released in the UK. Given that almost all of these releases are literally just the 20-minute short dumped on tape or disc, I find it amazing that they charged full retail price for this thing. That being said, it's been re-released more than We Wish You a Turtle Christmas or Alpha's Magical Christmas combined. So it clearly must have developed something of a following, and honestly, having seen it now, I can kind of see the appeal. Santa's Pocket Watch isn't for everyone. It's specifically built for a very niche audience, and I feel it really wouldn't sit well with anyone under 25 just purely for how inane and basic it really honestly is. That being said, for anyone over 30, this is a short but sweet time corridor to a much simpler time. While it is ultra basic and honestly only barely has enough going on for it to constitute being classified as a film, I'd be lying if I said I didn't kind of just enjoy this sweet little movie doing its own slightly odd thing in the corner. I'm glad I've seen this film. I can't recommend it, not to the general population, but if you've liked what you've seen and heard in this unusually short review, I'd say maybe try and dig a copy out. It's quite cheap online, and I think I may well hang on to my VHS copy for the time being.